Oh, it's
Yeah.
5:04.
Okay,
It's
so
5:04.
everyone, this is Kadi Riffe. She is one of the graduate assistants at the LGBTQ Center. So could you just go in with a brief introduction of your role and some of the services offered at the center?
Yeah, so yeah, like you said, I'm the graduate assistant, she, hers. We have a couple other staff members and then our interim director. We just hired our new director, which I'm really excited about. He starts on February 1st. So right now, I'm kind of functioning as both graduate assistant and interim director, like a little bit. But so I design programs, supervise our other staff, execute programs. I guess so some of the programs that we've got going right now. Thrive is kind of my personal project. It's a queer peer mentoring program. So we pair upperclassmen with underclassmen. And they, sometimes they share LGBTQ type identities, sometimes they share majors or hobbies. But that one's turned out really good. We have a lot of good people in that one. We've got the queer crafting program going right now. So if you need crafts to do over winter break, stop by the center. We've got goodie bags. Yeah, I mean, those are the big ones right now. We've got a couple more support groups. We've got Kaleidoscope is our trans support group. We've got What's the Tea is our open support group. That one I think has only had one meeting and they'll kick off again in the spring. Yeah, I think that's the bulk of it. Things are always kind of shifting a little bit with quarantine and everything's still virtual, but yeah.
Okay, so then I'm Cole. You guys all know me because of you signed up through me. EOP coordinator, which stands for Elimination of Prejudice at Pi Lambda Phi. So if you want to jump into the Safe Zone training, I will turn my camera off and give you the mic.
Cool. I'm also going to turn my video off because I tend to make funny faces while I'm presenting. Okay. Here we go. So just so you know, the file format's a little funky, so it's not like a click through, but bear with me. And then when I'm presenting, I don't see the chat box. So if you have a question, feel free to just jump in. Comments, etc. All are welcome. Yeah, so like I said, I'm Kadi. I identify as a cis bi woman, so all of my identities, like that's the perspective that I'm giving this presentation from. My understanding obviously is not end all be all. This is just my interpretation of things as they go and the center's knowledge of these things. So if, like I said, if there's something that, oh, that doesn't sound right to me, please just say something and we can talk about it. So usually we'll go around and do name, gender, pronouns, and then your major. Cole, is that something you want to do or do you want to just blast through?
Let's just blast through.
Okay. Well, just for speed's sake, I'm Kadi, she, hers, and I graduated with my bachelor's in women, gender, sexuality studies, and I'm finishing my master's in the same thing. So goals for Safe Zone: to educate members of the community about the needs and concerns of LGBTQ persons, become comfortable with discussing sexuality and gender identities, talking about the importance of language, how what you say can affect other people when it comes to identity language, foster an atmosphere on campus which supports the academic and professional success of LGBTQ persons, as well as their personal and social growth, and help create a campus climate free of discrimination. Establish a visible network of allies. That's kind of the important part, really, of educated people who can provide support, information, and assistance to all LGBTQ persons within the university. After this is done, you're all qualified as like Safe Zone trained people, I guess. We have stickers and magnets in the center that you can display so people know you're a safe and educated person to talk to on these topics. And to provide LGBTQ student, staff, and faculty with access to resources that are available both on campus and in the greater Cincinnati community. All right, talking about language. So, few cautions about terminology. there are some like outdated and offensive terms. Language obviously changes and adapts. I want to say more so with identity language, but I can't obviously verify that. Excuse me. But so there are a lot of terms that, you know, at one point it was totally okay to refer to an identity as this term, and now not so much, and vice versa. For example, the word queer, for a long time that was used as an insult and still is used as an insult sometimes, but the LGBTQ community has more or less reclaimed that term, at least more in our generation. Some folks in some older generations still do have issues with the word queer, so it's very important to work with the individual on what terminology they're comfortable with. If they're comfortable using the word queer, cool. If not, also cool. And it's just important to have that communication open and respect how individuals want to be identified. Meanings aren't static, that ties into the same thing. Meanings aren't shared. So there are some groups, so I mean, and my understanding is it happens a lot over generational differences, but where one generation will use a word to refer to one thing and another will use it for something else. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but many of them fall into the meanings aren't static. A lot of times it's the same word and the meaning has shifted. Yes, and just again, ask them what they want to be referred to as, what terminology they want to use, and roll with it. It's really not up to you to determine what somebody else is comfortable with using. In-group versus out-group usage. So I've had a few conversations with this, about this with my supervisor and with my coworkers. To the best of our knowledge, there aren't a ton of like in-group specific phrases and terminology. There are a couple for the trans community is our understanding, but basically just pay attention and be respectful and be careful. And if someone says, hey, you know, you're not part of this identity group, you need to not be saying that word, take it and roll with it, you know. And that's the whole point, is learning and adjusting and adapting as we go to make sure we're being respectful. Understanding sex. So sex assigned at birth. So I have the exact note that my director wanted me to say. Declared male, female, or intersex by a medical professional based on genitals and or chromosomes. So that's, you know, it's fairly arbitrary, quite frankly, but it's basically what a doctor says when you pop out. They're like, hey, based on these physical or chromosomal characteristics, this is the sex we're assigning you. I mean, sex and sex assigned at birth don't have much of a difference. They're pretty comparable. It gets a little bit fuzzier with intersex sometimes, or people who don't have, who the doctors assign them one sex at birth based on external physical traits, but then have internal physical traits. It's all very complex and all very arbitrary, and the ties between sex and gender make everything that much worse, because obviously there is none, but everybody else seems to stick to that. So intersex refers to individuals whose sex cannot be classified as distinctly male or female. So this can be due to atypical combinations of chromosomes, insensitivity to certain hormones, or atypical formation of the genitalia. So like I was saying, some people might not be recognized as intersex until later in life, like during puberty, when atypical sex development occurs. I want to stop here for a second because I know that these could be kind of confusing. Does anybody have any questions? I know I may have garbled that a little bit.
We haven't gotten any in the chat yet. If you have one, feel free to turn on your mic.
I was gonna say, actually, that would function really well, Cole, if you see a comment pop up in the chat, if you just want to read it. I think that might work really well. All right, gender. So in this, I'll come up, I think the next slide's better, but they put this in here anyways. So gender is very closely tied with sex in contemporary, and we're moving away from it, but it's very, a lot of people conflate sex and gender as the same thing. Your gender is what you identify with, whereas sex is more related to what a doctor says you are. The gender binary refers to the assumption that there are only two genders, male and female. Man and woman are usually the pieces of that binary. And then gender role is how you ascribe to the gender that you move about society with. So if we're working within a gender binary and you identify as a woman, your gender role, you would play a lot of the pieces that are assumed a woman would play. It's messy. It's all messy. Everything's messy. Excuse me. So yeah, I like this graphic a lot better. So gender orientation is who you are, how you're oriented, how you're set up. Your gender identity is the identity you claim. Often gender orientation and identity are pretty much the same thing. Sometimes they're not, sometimes they're different, but and then your expression is how you present your gender. And then gender expression is how you present your gender. And then gender attribution is what others assume when they look at you, what gender they assume you are. So this is one that it's important to be mindful of, because obviously you can't tell someone's gender just by looking at them. So it happens, of course, but it's something that you just need to be aware of and work against that. So some terms associated with gender: cisgender, also shortened to cis. So it refers to individuals who exhibit attitudes, feelings, and appearance and behaviors that are compatible with cultural expectations associated with their sex assigned at birth. So that one's really long and complicated. The staff at the center tend to function with cis is your gender aligns with the sex assigned at birth. So what the doctor says and how you identify happen to line up. And then transgender or trans is not cis, more or less. So binary versus non-binary. Sorry, I'm flipping through my notes here. Excuse me. So transgender individuals can fall within the gender binary, the functioning gender binary. So they can identify as a trans man, a trans woman, and we'll come across more of that terminology moving forward. And then some individuals identify as non-binary, so they identify as falling outside of the gender binary, somewhere on a spectrum. So that would include terms like agender, so people who identify as not having any gender at all; gender fluid, so people who move around on the gender spectrum; and gender queer is kind of a broad term for a lot of this. It can mean different things to different people, but basically not cis, I think is a good function for that. Questioning, there are a lot of individuals, obviously, because the society is so heteronormative and cisnormative, so the assumption is that you're straight and that you're cis. It takes a lot of people a lot of time of questioning to understand what they're feeling, why they're not fitting into an arbitrary system. So there are a lot of individuals who identify as questioning, which is usually like a transitory to transgender, trans identity. Sometimes it's just a broader awareness of their cisgender identity. Again, it varies from person to person. So understanding sexuality. Your sexual behavior is who you have sex with. This may or may not line up with your sexual identity or your sexual orientation. It's just who you're having sex with. Sexual orientation, or who you're not having sex with. Sexual orientation refers to the deep internal sense of who we are attracted or oriented to in terms of our emotional, romantic, and sexual attractions. So, I mean, that one's pretty straightforward. I think this is the one that people are most familiar with. And then sexual identity is, it's who you identify as. So sometimes you identify sexually along the same lines as your sexual orientation. Sometimes you identify with your behavior, and sometimes it's a mix. So one of the examples that I've been told when given this presentation before to kind of help explain this system is if you have a homosexual cis man who's married to a heterosexual cis woman. It happens for a variety of reasons, but so the sexual behavior implied in a relationship like that would be this homosexual man having sex with a heterosexual woman. His sexual orientation would be homosexual, and then his sexual identity could fall he could identify as a hetero, like he could exist in the world as a heterosexual man, even if he has an orientation of homosexuality. He could identify with homosexuality, but continue to function in a heterosexual relationship, and it could all fall somewhere in between. Again, it's all messy. It changes from person to person. Yeah. Do we have any questions at this point?
None yet.
Good. Oh, not yet. Is that what you said? Okay. So some terms associated with sexuality. So some of these are pretty familiar to most people at this point, especially if you've been in college for a few months. Gay, typically applied to men who love men, has also been kind of brought in to apply to anyone in the LGBTQ spectrum. Again, there's a lot of personal preference tied there. Lesbian is traditionally tied only to women who love women. Bisexual and pansexual. So the understanding that has, and it's shifting and changing even, I mean, as we speak. Bisexual in the past has been utilized as being sexually attracted to both men and women, to both pieces of the gender binary, which again, gender binary doesn't exist, but society functions, etc. This term is adapting to, loving more than one. It's like two or more gender identities. So some might identify as bisexual and love the same gender as them, and then intersex. You know, there's, which again isn't a gender, but like gender non-binary. And then pansexual tends to, pansexual identity holding people tend to just love people regardless of their gender. Gender doesn't play nearly as big a role as it does in some others. Queer is kind of the umbrella term that's been reclaimed by the LGBTQ society. So you can be gay and queer, you can be lesbian and queer, you can be bi and queer. Some people choose to identify just as queer without claiming anything else. It's all okay, it's all personal preference. Questioning is less of an identity than it is a process, but a lot of people who are questioning, they tend to be absorbed into the LGBTQ community simply for awareness and understanding that, you know, they're not necessarily cis, they're not necessarily het. Asexual refers to individuals who do not experience primary sexual attraction and who may or may not experience emotional and or romantic attraction. So it's important to note that people who identify as asexual can still have sex. A lot of them do. A lot of them are in loving, committed relationships. This is just an aspect of their identity. It doesn't hold them back from anything. It's just who they are. Factors that affect sexual attraction, sex, so body parts, gender orientation and identity, and then gender expression. So I think that's all pretty straightforward, but if there's a question, let me know. Connecting the dots, the terminology triangle. So sex is physical. It refers to what's in your pants or in your jeans. Jeans and jeans. But like your chromosomes and your hormones and things like that. So this is the physical biological piece. Gender is cultural. It refers to what kind of pants you are are not wearing. So that's kind of gender presentation, but yeah, it's where you fit in society, how you identify, and how you present yourself through society, which may or may not work here, which, you know, this is cis and blah, blah, blah. Sexual orientation is psychological. It refers to whose pants you would like to get into or not. Again, I think this piece is pretty straightforward, but I've also been doing this for a long time, so y'all gotta call me on it if I'm going too fast. Let's talk about you. So first, is there anything that we missed? Is there anything that was missed in that chunk of the presentation that y'all feel needs to be brought up? Anything based on your understanding of the community, personal experiences with terminology, anything?
I don't think so. You're doing a good job so far.
Thanks, Cole. Okay. So recognizing where you're at. These are some of the things it's important to regularly check in with yourself and see how you're doing when it comes to inclusivity, activism, things like that. So are you actively participating in working to make the space you're in more inclusive to the LGBTQ community, whether that be you know, your dorm or your campus or your hometown. And that can happen in a variety of ways, even something as simple as posting on Facebook or social media. That's a step in the right direction. Are you enabling the exclusion of the LGBTQ community and people with those identities? This can be something as easy as recognizing but not acting, which is the next point. If somebody says something that is harmful to the LGBTQ community, are you stepping up and saying something? Are you laughing it off? And again, you know, there's all kinds of things. There are all kinds of response types. You just need to pay attention to the ones that you're doing and really kind of think about if it's helping or harming. Recognizing and interrupting ties in here. So if somebody says something, are you stepping up saying something? Are you educating yourself? Just by being in this presentation, you signed up for this, you're educating yourself. And a lot of this information may be old news to you, some of it might be new, but you're taking those steps to expand your knowledge on this topic. You're participating in questioning and dialoguing, that's a part of this. Are you supporting and encouraging the community and the individuals within it? And then are you initiating some of those dialogues with your friends and family and the community in order to prevent some of the negative stuff? Let's talk about culture. Understanding heterosexism. So I think I've mentioned this before. Heterosexism is a system of attitudes, bias, and discrimination in favor of heterosexual behavior, orientation, and identity. So I mentioned before heteronormativity, which is the assumption that everyone is straight. It establishes heterosexuality as the norm. And so while that is obviously quite harmful, heterosexism is the specific functioning to harm, if that makes sense. So it includes the dominant cultural belief that heterosexuality is normal and therefore is superior. So heteronormativity would cover this first part, and the superiority would cover the second, would cover heterosexism. It includes the presumption that everyone is heterosexual, and it believes it includes the belief that everyone should be heterosexual. So again, this first piece is kind of more heteronormativity, and this second piece here is heterosexism. Heterosexism. So like this little graphic down here says, I've never met a gay Daisy before. It says you've led a very sheltered life. So some examples of heterosexism: cultural assumptions, assuming everyone's straight; social exclusion, excluding those who aren't; verbal slurs, I'm not gonna list those obviously, but there are a lot of them; denial of rights. So, I mean, just Lord knows there are too many, but like gay parents not being allowed to adopt, and gay marriage for a long time, and still criminalization. So I'm thinking specifically of anti-sodomy laws, physical violence, and death, which are self-explanatory, unfortunately. So how heterosexism operates and what it looks like. So on the social level, the checkout line is really long. So Greta, an elderly woman who is next in line, turns to make conversation with Angelica, a young woman in her early 20s in line behind Greta. During the brief conversation, Greta asks Angelica her name, where she's from, and whether or not she has a boyfriend. So this would be an example of heterosexism functioning on the social level, because Greta assumes that Angelica has a boyfriend or doesn't. She's assuming that she is attracted to men and people who identify as men. I mean, that's what it's the assumption, that she's attracted to men because she presents as a woman. On the cultural level, Brian and Tim are out on a date. They have dinner, they go to a movie, take a stroll along Main Street. As they walk hand in hand in front of the window of the local diner, one customer remarks, "I don't have a problem with gay people, but I don't understand why they feel the need to throw it in our faces all the time." So on a cultural level, so this is, you know, obviously the hypocrisy of having an issue with gay people holding hands, but not straight people. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. If you have a question, shout it out, but I mean, it's this sucks, the end. And how heterosexism operates on an institutional level. So James Pittman was an openly gay man from Missouri who endured harassment at work and was ultimately fired after 7 years at the Cook Paper Recycling Corporation. He sued the company for discrimination, but the court in Missouri ruled that despite clear evidence of harassment, Pittman had no basis to sue, since Missouri does not include sexual orientation as a protected class in its non-discrimination law. So there are, I mean, as this graphic shows, excuse me, you can be fired for being gay in like literally almost the entire country. I mean, I don't really know what to say to this. It sucks. And you would think that, I don't know. I personally think that we've come farther, or thought that we had come farther. And then you see things like this and you're like, oh, well, not as far as you would hope. But yeah, so like the institution of, I mean, literally anything, the United States government is set up to be heteronormative, to be heterosexist, to discriminate against and make things much harder for people who do not identify as straight. It's a hot mess, y'all. Talk about a garbage fire. Now let's talk about climate. So we've got some national college climate data. So 68%, I mean, like most of the LGBTQ students that they surveyed reported they were targets of derogatory remarks, that harassment frequently occurred in public while walking on campus, that harassment frequently occurred in class, and then 29% of students that they surveyed said that they were targets of physical violence. And it's kind of shocking to see these numbers. Now, this was from 2010, so these numbers have certainly shifted a little bit. But it's kind of horrifying, quite frankly, to see how high these numbers are still, you know. So now these numbers are a little bit more recent and they're UC specific. So this is the 2018-2019 survey that the LGBTQ Center did. So 56% of students heard homophobic remarks and 77% heard, transphobic remarks from students across campus. These numbers are way too high. I mean, that's enough said. 46% of students reported feeling uncomfortable in class. 39% of students reported feeling uncomfortable in public spaces. 44% felt uncomfortable in residence halls. A lot of people said that the intersection of their race and sexual orientation and the intersection of their race and gender identity significantly increased the difficulties they faced navigating campus. So some of these numbers seem better than some of these big ones from the national college climate data. But obviously, every percentage would be zero, ideally. So it's kind of eye-opening to see, where UC falls in terms of how our students are feeling. And then there's some like national middle and secondary school climate data. So 71% of queer students reported that they regularly heard other students in their school make homophobic remarks. Over half reported that they regularly heard other students make negative remarks about how someone expressed gender. And that's just indirect harassment. I mean, the direct harassment levels are higher with verbal harassment because of their sexual orientation, gender expression. And 61.6% of queer students who reported an incident said that school staff did nothing in response. I mean, I'm kind of at a loss for words. I've done this presentation so many times and it gets me every time that, the institution of the education system is so, it's not set up to support queer students. And even if it is, the individual school staff have the opportunity to do nothing, which sucks, obviously. Let's talk about impact. So some issues faced by queer students: discomfort with self-identity, discomfort with the LGBTQ community, struggles with faith, rejection by others, loss of financial support, harassment, and safety. These are just some of them. Obviously, there are a lot of issues that are, queer students experience for a variety of reasons, but these are some of the big ones. Intersectionality, just as a disclaimer, this is pretty much my entire academic study system is intersectionality, so I love it. It refers to the ways in which systems of oppression, such as racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, xenophobia, classism, are interconnected and cannot be examined separately from one another. So this means, if you're talking about this man has experienced X, Y, and Z, and he is Black, you can't associate all of his X, Y, and Z's to him being Black. You also have to take into consideration his sexuality and his class and his religion. And, nothing, you can't examine things separately or you lose sight of the whole picture. Intersectionality also refers to the fact that individuals have multiple identities. So like I was talking about, their example is a Black, able-bodied, working class, female identified, non-English speaking. So you're not just, a cis woman, you're not just a Black man, you're not just, you've got all of these different identities that all play a part, and you can't separate them without losing sight of the whole person. It also recognizes that the impact of certain identities may be greater on individuals at certain times. So sometimes I have people do this. I'm not going to make y'all do it. It's a Monday. It's not a Monday. It is Monday. COVID time doesn't exist. So it's a Monday. So I'm not going to make you do it. But this is a cool thing to do on your own time if you want to take a screenshot. So this is the official student affairs model of UC. But so it's like you put your identities. So in the middle are like your core identities. So personal attributes, personal characteristics, and personal identity. So these are the things that you think about consistently, you know, even if it's just once a day, it's really always on your mind. And then context are some of the identities that you have that maybe aren't quite as important. Well, not, they might be just as important, but they don't play as big a role in you going about your daily life. So family background, sociocultural conditions, current experiences, career decisions, life planning. They've got like race and culture and gender and religion and orientation, all these things up here. And it's just interesting to kind of see what, like visually, what identities you have that impact you on a regular basis, because it might not be something you think about all the time. So issues faced by queer and transgender students of color. So they might speak a different language in terms of identity terminology. It's called vernacular when a group of people has kind of like a slang or how they use certain words. And there are different vernaculars for every group of people. But so the queer community might have one vernacular, the transgender community might have like some other words, students of color might have another set of words. So to kind of code switch and jump between as you move about in between groups of these different people, if you have all of these identities, trying to utilize, you know, the correct terminology wherever you are can be really frustrating. They may experience racism when with other queer people, and or may experience homophobia when with other people of color. Oh, sorry, my throat's dry. They may experience overlapping forms of discrimination and harassment. This ties back to the intersectionality slide we were just talking about. Homophobia, racism, sexism, classism, etc. They might resist coming out because they fear the loss of community support networks. They may feel they have to lead double lives, so like out with queer people, not out with people of color. They may feel pressured to choose which of their identities is most central to them. They may feel pressured to view one of their identities as more privileged or discriminated against than the others. Excuse me. And they may feel their sexuality is invisible because others only see their race. I want to stop here for a second. Do we have any questions, comments, things I missed, things I needed to expand on, things you would add? Cool. Issues faced by bisexual students. So stereotypes, isolation, invisibility, bisexual erasure is one here where, you know, people tend to ignore the existence of bisexual identities or invalidate it. Double standard, and then evolving ideas and language around bisexual and pansexual identities. So like I was talking about closer to the beginning, how the term bisexual is kind of evolving, but how individuals that claim the bisexual identity may have different definitions of what that means to them. Some issues faced by trans, I got all that, okay. Some issues faced by trans students. Self-consciousness about expressed and perceived gender, names and pronouns, facing assumptions about sexual orientation, receiving access to businesses and services, obtaining knowledgeable, welcoming healthcare. That one's really difficult. For the record, the LGBTQ Center has a list of Cincinnati and Ohio healthcare providers that are trans affirming, so I can get that to y'all if you need it. Having to educate everyone around them, that one's a big one. And also like answering questions that are really invasive that they don't need to answer, but people don't realize they shouldn't be asking that. Finding and keeping jobs, using public restrooms. There's a list on UC's website pointing out where all of our gender neutral bathrooms are. We have one on the same floor as the LGBTQ Center in Stager, which is nice. On-campus housing, documentation, safety. I mean, the list is endless because again, we're in a society that's built around heteronormativity and I'm trying to think what I don't think cisnormativity is the word, but that's, I mean, the same. You're assumed to be straight and cis unless like proven otherwise, I guess, which obviously is really messed up. Let's talk about being inclusive. Supporting students on campus. So understand that creating an inclusive space is an ongoing process. Just this year, I mean, and I'm talking in the past, I just looked at my wrist like I had a watch on. I don't. In the past, like 2 or 3 months, we have updated the Catalyst system so that people can put their gender identity and their pronouns in the system so that it shows up on like roll call and attendance sheets. So teachers aren't dead naming or using the name of identity, excuse me. So people aren't dead naming students in class in attempts to get attendance. Dead naming, in case I haven't mentioned it before, is when people call a student or an individual by the name that they were given at birth by their parents, which is no longer the name that they utilize now that they have changed due to their like coming into their gender identity. Using inclusive language, so like saying y'all or just you all instead of hey guys. That's one I've been trying to work on specifically. Using they as much as you can when referring to someone, because even if you know it's a safe bet. Just comments that are heterosexist, homophobic, or biased in terms of gender identity or expression. So rather than calling students out, we call it calling them in. So asking, questioning why they say what they're saying. If they don't realize that they're being offensive, explain it to them rather than just like, hey, that's super mean, don't say that. Like having that dialogue and having that conversation and asking them to reflect on how their comments might be perceived by others. So really, rather than just attempting to kind of shut that student up, to have that dialogue and conversation so they understand how their comments are hurtful. Be patient with students exploring their gender identity. They may change names and pronouns more than once. This is something that I hadn't thought of until I came to UC for school. As people are developing and understanding who they are, they can change their names until they find one that fits. They can, you know, change what pronouns they're comfortable with using. And it, again, it's up to them. So if they say, hey, I'm going by this name now, roll with it. If they say, hey, can you use these pronouns for me? Roll with it. That's roll with it. That's the big thing. Any questions while I take my water break? Cool. So what to do when someone comes out to you. Be aware of your body language and facial gestures. Just make sure you're really open physically, because a lot of times that can, like if you're physically kind of closed off and you look pissed or confused or something like that, it can be kind of a dead giveaway that something's going on, and it can really shut that person down. So just make sure you're open and attentive and listening and respectful. Let them know you respect their confidentiality. Just because somebody's come out to you doesn't mean they're out everywhere. So that's, it's something you need to keep to yourself unless told otherwise. Ask what you need to know to assist them, but don't be invasive or make it about what you want to know. So a good open-ended question is, hey, what do you need from me? They don't need anything, cool. Move forward with your life. But that way you provide them the option for using your services and your abilities, but also just knowing that they have that support if they need it. Mirror the language the student uses to self-identify. Like I was saying before, roll with it. If they're using this terminology X, Y, and Z, that's what they're comfortable with using, use it. Don't assume the student is in crisis. That one's, it's pretty straightforward. Not everybody who's coming out is having a big hard issue with it. The experience is different for everyone. So don't assume that they're having a really hard time. Just be open and aware. ask if there's anything they need from you, access to resources. As far as UC goes, the LGBTQ Center has a ridiculous amount of resources. So y'all are welcome, obviously, to come use us and refer your friends to us, etc. That's literally what the center is there for. So if we don't know the answer, we'll find somebody who does, is what I like to say. For college students, there are some special considerations when they come out to their family. So don't assume and like push them to come out to their family. It's not always a great idea. You have to think about financial situations, living situations, and for some people, they have the possibility of losing that support system and that community in their family. So there are a lot of pieces. So just don't be pushing. What to do if there's someone comes out to you. So touch base with them regularly to make sure that they know their relationship with you is undamaged. That can be a fear for a lot of people coming out. And then commit yourself as an ally, offer and be available to support them as they come out to others. So just be a good friend and just pay attention to you being a good friend in the time following. Let's talk about resources. So some campus resources. Some of these are a little iffy right now because of COVID. Some of them either didn't start up for this semester or are on a break for this semester. So you'll really just need to reach out to the specific organization to see what their deal is and how they're functioning around the global pandemic. So UC Alliance, Out in Business, Out in Healthcare, Pride Ambassadors, excuse me. Pride at Lindner is the one that I know is very active right now for business students. Support groups, there's Tea Time. I don't think this one's functioning anymore. Safe Place, I believe, is our, oh shoot, no, I don't know. This is an old PowerPoint. I don't know what Safe Place is. Grounds for Support is being revamped to What's the Tea? And I can send information for that to you, Cole, after the presentation. Kaleidoscope is our trans support group. And then Shades of the Rainbow was a student-led group that I don't believe is functioning at the moment. So there's the LGBTQ Center, that's where I work. The Women's Center is right next door to us. Again, we're in Stager, which is right across from TUC. It's the big long one that stretches down Main Street. Health and Wellness Services. Oh, Women's Center is completely virtual right now. I think they're opening limited hours in the spring, but I'm not sure. And we're open 11 to 2, Monday through Friday. Health and Wellness Services. So CAPS, Counseling and Psychological Services. They are doing stuff right now. I think they've got virtual visits, which is nice, but you can find more about that on their website. Let's Talk. There's one specific counselor at CAPS that works with the LGBTQ community and has a partnership with us to have kind of like open office hours. You just kind of show up and talk things out. And then the campus advocates, they are here from Women Helping Women, which is a UC student started Cincinnati-based organization. It was started a long time ago. It's like a big deal in Cincinnati now. Women Helping Women is, but they are on the other side of us. And they've got a bunch of programs going this semester. Their student group is Peers Helping Peers. You may have seen them on social media. Harassment Support and Response, the Title IX office, University Ombuds office. This is for like peer-to-peer conflict resolution. And then Dean of Students, who is the current interim director of the LGBTQ Center until our new guy takes over in February. So our training series, you're doing this one right now, woohoo! If you stop by the center, we have stickers and magnets that have this on it. So you can look, I'm a safe zone ally, which is cool. The next level of training we have is the advocate training. So it kind of touches on the things that we talked about in this training, but then it goes further about how you can be an advocate. And then we have, the last one, which is how to be an activist. So it's kind of like a progressive thing. So we have these practice things. like scenarios, but I think Cole, your discussion outline, I think will probably be more beneficial. So I'm just not going to do these. And that's the end of the presentation.
Okay, so we can go ahead and start. So thank you for that very informative presentation. I learned some stuff. I'm sure that everybody else did too. So first question is, how do you identify homophobia?
This is to everyone, right? Not just to me.
Mainly between the two of us.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, homophobia is at its core. I'm not turning my camera on because I'm tired.
You're fine.
Homophobia is at its core just, you know, the fear and oppression of people who don't identify as straight. So, I mean, anything from exclusion to outright hatred and jokes. I mean, I think that's one of the common things on campus is like gay jokes. At least that's been my experience at UC. That's kind of where I see homophobia happen most. And exclusion. I mean, yeah.
So a lot of times with racial issues, you see the white savior complex where a white person takes over an issue and kind of overpowers the situation. How do we intervene as allies without taking over the situation and kind of taking the power away from a queer person?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So it's important as specifically like white allies to make space and raise the voices of like queer people of color, since we're talking queer, to use the platforms that we have to lift other people up and so that they have that platform that they might not have otherwise. So in your position at your fraternity to make sure that when, I mean, you, for a presentation on queer people, you brought in a queer person and a queer center like that was the first. Obviously this is on sexuality and not not on race, but I mean literally if we had a queer person of color providing them the opportunity, like working in the center, providing them the opportunity, because there are a lot of pieces and a lot of things, and now I'm rambling. So making the space and lifting voices.
Okay. Is there ever a bad time to ask someone what their pronouns are?
No. Period. It's something that we're working it in more. It's a good thing to put it in your email signatures. I've gotten to the point finally. It's taken me a long time to get into the habit of it, but when I introduce myself, I try to say specifically like, "Hi, I'm Katie, she, her," and that the person I'm introducing myself wants to say their pronouns, they have that space then. But if they're, questioning or they don't really feel comfortable sharing, cool, they don't have to. But it's kind of like what you were saying about what I was saying about making space is providing the opportunity rather than kind of forcing someone to do it first.
Okay.
So yeah, always good.
Not exclusive, correct? So
one more time.
Pronouns aren't exclusive, so you don't have to just be he, him, his. Along with like gender fluidity, right. You can identify with multiple or.
Yeah, so I have friends that identify as like she, they, he, they. They respond to both. They identify with both. Some people just identify, or they just utilize like they, them pronouns. If they identify with a broad spectrum, it's very much so personal preference. And there's never a bad time to ask.
Okay, so the LGBTQ Center right now has limited hours, 11 to 2, Monday to Friday. 2 follow-up questions to that. So first one, are those hours going to be continued on in the spring semester, or do you guys see any changes coming?
So currently, we call it Identity Row. That's the Ethnic Programs and Services, LGBTQ Center, and the Women's Center. We're all in the same floor of Stager. So currently, that's the functioning hours of Stager. just for COVID limits and things like that. My hope would be that we would maintain the hours. We don't have a ton of in-person interaction with students. We'll have people show up and hang out and whatever, but it's not nearly as much as it was pre-COVID. That being said, we do have, with the director coming in, we'll have more staff to cover more hours if Stager decides to open more. So assume 11 to 2. Follow our Instagram. We will tell you on Instagram if that has changed.
Okay, so if the center is closed, where should people go if they have questions?
Shoot me an email. I'm on my email constantly. I mean, if you show up to the center and it's closed, slip a note under the door or set, like, I mean, yeah, no, I do my best to be available, even if I'm not like physically in the space. So I can send my email right now in the chat box. But if I'm not in the center and one of my coworkers is, I've got business cards and all kinds of stuff in there. So yes.
Okay, this should be a straightforward question, but I feel like I should ask. Are events at the LGBTQ Center open to allies?
Yes, they are. So everything is open to allies except for some of our closed support groups. So Kaleidoscope is a closed support group, so it's only for trans-identified and gender questioning individuals. It's, you know, it's to make that space for specifically for trans-identified folks. And we have other, I mean, we have support groups like What's the Tea, and we have Thrive. So we have space for allies to participate, but specifically for some of these closed groups, those are not open to allies.
Okay. With the hire of a new full-time director, what changes will be coming to the center?
Ooh, I'm so excited to find out, yo. I'm geeked. There were a couple of programs that we carried over this semester from the past. Thrive was a revamp of our Pride Ambassadors program. Kaleidoscope has been functioning for a while. We're doing Lavender graduation again. So those will still continue. And then my expectation is that the new director will also set up some more programs. One of his big things at the institution he was at prior to UC was he did a really massive National Coming Out Day celebration every year. So that's something I would imagine he would bring with him. But I haven't had a conversation with him since he got the job, like 3 days ago. So I am certain y'all will hear more via the Instagram, because that's all I know how to communicate with. And that will be happening, like I said, February 1st.
Okay. These two aren't questions, just news and updates, I guess. So Pi Lambda Phi fraternity does have it in our international policies that we do accept any brothers who identify as male. Doesn't matter if they were born assigned at birth male. And then also some good news. A couple slides back we had where there were all those states where trans and queer people can be fired for their gender identity or sexual orientation. June of this year, the Supreme Court ruled in Bostock v. Clayton County that that is unconstitutional and illegal. So that is not something that we have to worry about anymore.
Woohoo!
Okay.
Ignoring all the loopholes.
If anybody has any last questions or comments, go ahead and put them in the chat. We will be sure to answer them. Otherwise, thank you guys for coming out. The next event is in 56 minutes with the AACRC and United Black Student Organization, no, United Black Student Association, UBSA, focusing on how to do, once again, be a better ally, going beyond posting a black square on social media. And then we also have another event on Wednesday at 5, which is Believing Sexual Assault Survivors with the student organization. It's on Us UC. Reach out to me. You can DM the Pi Lambda Phi Instagram if you have any questions about that. If not, once again, thank you guys for coming out. Thank you, Katie, for leading this presentation. Have a wonderful night.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.